You're confident, intelligent, and well-educated. You have a knack for debate, a mind sharpened by years of learning, and strong convictions about right and wrong. You consider yourself rational, maybe even above average. You probably think the greatest threats to civilization come from the ignorant, the uneducated, the obviously stupid. But what if I told you that throughout history, it wasn't the ignorant masses who enabled humanity's greatest horrors? It wasn't the uneducated who designed the gas chambers, implemented the gulags, or orchestrated the killing fields. It was people exactly like you, the educated, the intelligent, the credentialed, the ones who thought they knew better. What if I told you that your intelligence, the very thing you're most proud of, might actually be making you dangerous? Not just to yourself, but to everyone around you. This isn't speculation. This is science. And it's happening right now. As the renowned psychologist Gustave Le Bon observed over a century ago, the masses have never thirsted after truth. They turn aside from evidence that is not to their taste, preferring to deify error, if error seduce them. Whoever can supply them with illusions is easily their master. Whoever attempts to destroy their illusions is always their victim. Today, we're going to explore the 7 levels of collective stupidity, how intelligent people, step by step, transform from rational individuals into dangerous mobs capable of unthinkable atrocities. And I guarantee that level 7 will make you question everything you think you know about intelligence, society, and your own mind. But here's the terrifying part. If you're watching this and thinking, those other people are so stupid, you've already missed the point. You're already trapped in the very system I'm about to describe. Let's begin with a man who understood stupidity better than perhaps anyone in history. His name was Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German theologian and pastor who found himself imprisoned in 1943 for his opposition to the Nazi regime. From his prison cell, as he watched his educated, cultured, civilized nation descend into barbarism, Bonhoeffer made a chilling observation that would change how we understand human behavior forever. He wrote, "Stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of the good than malice." Think about that for a moment. More dangerous than malice. More dangerous than evil itself. But Bonhoeffer wasn't talking about low IQ or lack of education. He was describing something far more sinister, what he called a moral defect. He observed that stupidity was a willful refusal to engage in critical thinking and self-reflection. It was people choosing to abandon their capacity for independent thought. And here's what terrified Bonhoeffer most. He noticed that this stupidity wasn't evenly distributed. People who lived in isolation, away from social pressures, showed much less of this defect. But put those same individuals in groups, especially during times of rising power and social upheaval, and something horrifying happened. They became, in Bonhoeffer's words, defenseless against reason and blind to the consequences of their actions. They started clinging to slogans, catchwords, and propaganda, losing their sense of independent thought and moral responsibility. These weren't naturally stupid people. They were making a choice. They were choosing comfort over truth, belonging over thinking, social acceptance over moral responsibility. Bonhoeffer realized he was witnessing something that went beyond individual psychology. He was observing the foundation upon which all collective stupidity is built. Because before a society can descend into madness, individuals within that society must first surrender their commitment to rational thought. And the most chilling part? Bonhoeffer noted that, under certain circumstances, such as times of rising power and influence, stupidity spreads like contagion, infecting large segments of society. Think about that. Stupidity as a contagion. An epidemic that spreads from person to person, group to group, institution to institution, until entire civilizations become infected. This is level 1, the individual decision to abandon critical thinking in favor of social comfort. It seems harmless at first, just going along to get along, not rocking the boat, accepting popular opinion without question. But this foundation of individual intellectual surrender is what makes everything else possible. The transition from individual stupidity to collective stupidity happens through a process so simple, so universal, that it's been replicated in laboratories thousands of times. It was first demonstrated by a psychologist named Solomon Asch in the 1950s. Asch's experiment was elegantly simple. He showed participants two cards, one with a single line, another with 3 lines of obviously different lengths. The task was absurd in its simplicity. Match the line on the first card to the identical line among the 3 options. Any child could do this. The correct answer was obvious to anyone with functioning eyesight. But here's where it gets interesting. Asch placed each participant in a room with 7 other people who were secretly working with the experimenter. These confederates were instructed to give obviously wrong answers. The real participant was always the second to last to respond. What happened next reveals something fundamental about human nature that should terrify you. 75% of participants conformed to the group's obviously incorrect response at least once. Many continued to give wrong answers, even when they could clearly see the right answer. These weren't stupid people. They weren't blind. They weren't confused about what they were seeing. In follow-up interviews, most admitted they knew the group was wrong, but they conformed anyway. One participant captured the essence of level 2 perfectly. I knew I was right, but I didn't want to be the only one. This is the mechanism by which individual stupidity becomes collective stupidity. People abandon their private information, what they can see with their own eyes, what they know to be true. Not because they believe the group, but because conforming feels safer than standing alone. The Asch experiments have been replicated across cultures, across decades, with remarkably consistent results. Put people in groups, apply social pressure, and a significant percentage will abandon their own perception of reality. Now scale this up from a psychology laboratory to an entire society. In the 1930s Germany, ordinary citizens, teachers, doctors, shopkeepers, professors, began conforming to increasingly extreme anti-Semitic policies. Not because they necessarily believed Jews were dangerous, but because dissent had become socially costly. Each small act of conformity made the next act easier, until ordinary people found themselves complicit in genocide. The same pattern emerged in Rwanda in 1994, where neighbors turned against neighbors. In Cambodia, under the Khmer Rouge, where intellectuals were slaughtered by their former colleagues. In China during the Cultural Revolution, where students denounced their professors and children informed on their parents. In each case, the transition happened gradually. Level 1 created individuals susceptible to abandoning reason. Level 2 activated that susceptibility through social pressure. Suddenly, entire populations were acting against their own better judgment, their own moral intuitions, their own clear perception of reality. But here's what makes this truly dangerous. Once conformity takes hold in a group, it becomes self-reinforcing. Each person who conforms provides social proof for the next person's conformity. The group's incorrect judgment appears more and more reasonable simply because more and more people accept it. This is how obviously false ideas, that certain races are inferior, that economic systems that have failed repeatedly will work this time, that censorship protects democracy, can take hold in societies full of intelligent, educated people. Level 2 transforms individual stupidity into group stupidity. But we're just getting started. The third level reveals something even darker about human psychology. It was illuminated by perhaps the most disturbing experiments in the history of psychology, conducted by Stanley Milgram at Yale University in the early 1960s. Milgram wanted to understand how ordinary people could participate in atrocities. How could educated Germans have implemented the Holocaust? How could civilized people become complicit in systematic murder? His experiment was deceptively simple. Participants were told they were taking part in a study on learning and memory. They were assigned the role of teacher and instructed to administer electric shocks to a learner, actually an actor, every time the learner gave a wrong answer. With each wrong answer, they were to increase the voltage. The shock generator had clear labels: slight shock, moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity, shock, danger, severe shock, and finally, ominously, triple X. As the experiment progressed, the learner would bang on the wall, scream in pain, beg for the experiment to stop, and eventually fall silent. The participants, ordinary people from all walks of life, could hear everything. When participants hesitated, a calm authority figure in a lab coat would give 4 simple prompts. 1. Please continue. 2. The experiment requires that you continue. 3. It is absolutely essential that you continue. 4. You have no other choice. You must go on. The results were shocking. 65% of participants, nearly 2/3, administered what they believed were potentially lethal electric shocks to a complete stranger, simply because an authority figure told them to. These weren't sadists. They weren't naturally cruel people. Many were visibly distressed, sweating, trembling, even crying as they administered the shocks. But they continued anyway. And here's the most chilling part. The more intelligent and educated the participants, the more likely they were to comply. Smart people were better at creating sophisticated justifications for their actions. The experiment must be safe. They wouldn't allow anything truly dangerous. The scientist knows what he's doing. I'm not responsible. I'm just following instructions. This is for the advancement of science. Intelligence didn't protect against compliance. It enabled more elaborate self-deception. This is level 3. The point where conformity meets authority, and ordinary people become capable of extraordinary evil, while maintaining their self-image as moral, rational individuals. But Milgram's experiments revealed something even more disturbing. In variations where the authority figure wasn't present, compliance dropped dramatically. When participants could see the victim clearly, compliance dropped. When they had to physically force the victim's hand onto the shock plate, many refused. Proximity to authority increased compliance. Distance from consequences increased compliance. Abstraction made cruelty easier. Now think about how modern societies are organized. We have vast, complex hierarchies where authority is distant and abstract. We have specialized roles where people implement small pieces of larger policies without seeing the full picture. We have technological systems that create distance between decision-makers and consequences. We've created the perfect conditions for level 3 stupidity on a massive scale. The bureaucrats who processed the paperwork for deportation trains weren't killing people. They were just doing their jobs. The engineers who designed more efficient gas chambers weren't committing murder. They were solving technical problems. The accountants who tracked the stolen assets weren't thieves. They were maintaining accurate records. Each person in the chain could maintain their sense of moral dignity while participating in systematic atrocity. Authority provided justification. Distance provided comfort. Specialization provided plausible deniability. This is how genocide happens. Not through the actions of obvious monsters, but through the compliance of ordinary people who surrender their moral judgment to authority figures. Level 1 created individual susceptibility. Level 2 activated social conformity. Level 3 adds the devastating power of authority. Now entire populations can be directed toward atrocities while maintaining their self-image as good, moral, intelligent people. But we're still not at the most dangerous levels. Here's where the story takes a truly disturbing turn. Everything I've described so far might make you think that the solution is simply better education, higher intelligence, more sophisticated reasoning. If people just knew more, thought more clearly, analyzed more carefully, surely they would avoid these traps. But research conducted by Dan Kahan at Yale Law School reveals the opposite. In a series of experiments that should shake your faith in human rationality, Kahan discovered that intelligence doesn't protect against bias, it amplifies it. Using the cognitive reflection test to measure reasoning ability, Kahan found that the highest-scoring individuals, the smartest people in the room, displayed the strongest political biases when evaluating the truth of various statements. In one particularly revealing experiment, Kahan presented participants with statistical data about a skin cream treatment. When told the data related to the effectiveness of a medical treatment, even those with poor math skills could analyze it objectively and reach correct conclusions. But when the exact same data was presented as relating to gun control policy, something remarkable happened. Those with the highest numeracy skills, the best mathematical reasoning abilities, showed the greatest bias in their interpretations. they twisted the numbers to support their pre-existing political beliefs. This correlation between intelligence and ideological bias isn't an isolated finding. It's been replicated in multiple studies across the political spectrum. Smart people on both the left and right show stronger biases than their less intelligent counterparts. Since these biases are mutually contradictory, they can't all result from a superior understanding of truth. So what's happening here? The answer lies in understanding what intelligence actually is. Intelligence isn't a truth-seeking mechanism. It's a goal-achieving mechanism. And truth-seeking is just one possible goal among many. Our intelligence didn't evolve primarily to discover objective reality. It evolved to help us survive, secure status, achieve tribal belonging, and ultimately ensure reproductive success. These goals often required what we might call fashionably irrational beliefs. Beliefs that may not be true but are socially advantageous to hold. Since humans are intensely social creatures, it can be intelligent, in an evolutionary sense, to convince ourselves of irrational beliefs, if holding those beliefs increases our status and well-being within our tribe. This is what Dan Kahan calls identity protective cognition, using our cognitive abilities not to find truth, but to protect beliefs tied to our social identity. This means intelligent people aren't more easily misled by others. They're more easily misled by themselves. They're better at convincing themselves of things they want to believe, rather than things that are actually true. As novelist Saul Bellow put it, a great deal of intelligence can be invested in ignorance when the need for illusion is deep. The smarter you are, the better you are at rationalizing. You can construct more elaborate justifications, find more creative connections, craft more persuasive narratives to support what you already believe or want to believe. Intelligence doesn't protect against bias, it supercharges it. Consider the historical example of Samuel Cartwright, a respected 19th century physician who used his medical training to invent drapetomania, a supposed mental disorder that explained why slaves tried to escape. Rather than acknowledging the obvious truth that people don't want to be enslaved, he created an elaborate medical rationalization that allowed educated society to maintain their self-image as both moral and rational, while supporting an inherently immoral system. Only an intellectual could have created something so idiotic and made it sound scientific. Today we see the same pattern. Our most educated institutions produce increasingly sophisticated justifications for obviously harmful policies. The more counterintuitive or damaging an idea, the more intellectual virtuosity is required to defend it, and therefore the more status accrues to those who can do so successfully. This creates a perverse incentive system where truth-seeking becomes a liability, and sophisticated rationalization becomes an asset. Level 4 transforms individual and group stupidity into intellectual stupidity. Now collective delusions don't just spread through conformity and authority. They're actively defended by the smartest people in society, using the full power of human reasoning. The fifth level is where individual stupidity, social conformity, authority worship, and intellectual rationalization become systematized and institutionalized. This is where stupidity stops being a bug in the system and becomes a feature. For centuries, elite academic institutions like Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, and Yale have been engaged in what we might generously call education, but might more accurately be described as training people to win arguments rather than discern truth. These institutions have created what I call credential laundering, a process by which bad ideas gain respectability and authority through the prestige system. First, package subjective opinions in academic jargon to make them sound objective and scientific. Take a political position like capitalism is oppressive, and transform it into intersectional analysis reveals the hegemonic structures of late-stage neoliberalism. Second, publish these dressed-up opinions in peer-reviewed journals, often in fields with low empirical standards where virtually anything can be published if it uses the right language and supports the right conclusions. Third, cite these publications in more mainstream venues as evidence of scholarly consensus. Studies have shown becomes the magic phrase that transforms opinion into fact. Fourth, present these laundered opinions to the general public as established science that only ignorant people would question. Through this process, Ideologically motivated beliefs gain the appearance of objective knowledge without ever facing genuine empirical testing. The graduates of these institutions, let's call them master debaters, naturally gravitate toward fields where arguing well is more important than being correct: law, politics, media, academia, and increasingly, technology and business. In these theoretical domains, sheltered from the immediate feedback of physical reality, they can deploy their rhetorical skills to convince each other of fashionable but unfounded beliefs. The more counterintuitive or contrarian these beliefs, the more intellectual capital one gains for defending them successfully. This creates a competitive marketplace of ideas where victory goes not to the truest ideas but to the most cleverly defended ones. Consider the eugenics movement of the early 20th century. This wasn't fringe pseudoscience. It was mainstream academic thought, supported by leading universities, funded by major foundations, and taught as established science. The intellectual sophistication of its defenders made it more dangerous, not less. Brilliant minds like H.G. Wells, George Bernard Shaw, and Alexander Graham Bell used their intelligence to construct elaborate justifications for what we now recognize as genocidal ideology. The movement gained credibility precisely because it was supported by credentialed experts using scientific language. Similarly, the economic theories that led to the 2008 financial crisis weren't developed by obvious charlatans. They were created by brilliant mathematicians and economists at prestigious institutions, armed with Nobel Prizes and complex models that made their ideas seem unquestionably sophisticated. The housing bubble, the derivatives market, the too-big-to-fail mentality, all of these were intellectually sophisticated ideas that survived and thrived because they were defended by very smart people using very complex arguments. But complexity became camouflage. The more impenetrable an explanation became, the more it seemed to require specialized expertise, and the less likely it was to face effective challenge from outsiders. This is how obviously stupid ideas, like the notion that housing prices could rise indefinitely, or that risk could be eliminated through mathematical modeling, took hold among highly intelligent people. The same pattern appears throughout history. Lysenkoism in the Soviet Union, the pseudo-scientific belief that acquired characteristics could be inherited, dominated Soviet biology for decades because it was supported by credentialed experts and aligned with ideological preferences. In each case, institutional prestige provided protection from criticism. Once an idea was blessed by prestigious institutions, it became respectable regardless of its actual merit. The credential system short-circuited critical evaluation. Level 5 systematizes stupidity. Individual susceptibility, social conformity, authority worship, and intellectual rationalization are now embedded in institutional structures that actively produce and protect collective delusions. But the most terrifying part is still to come. The sixth level is where everything we've discussed, individual stupidity, social conformity, authority worship, intellectual rationalization, and institutional capture, combines to create what Carl Jung called a psychic epidemic, and what modern researchers call mass formation psychosis. Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, made a chilling observation about the greatest threats to human civilization. He wrote, "Indeed, it is becoming ever more obvious that it is not famine, not earthquakes, not microbes, not cancer, but man himself who is man's greatest danger to man, for the simple reason that there is no adequate protection against psychic epidemics, which are infinitely more devastating than the worst of natural catastrophes. A mass psychosis is an epidemic of madness, when large portions of society lose touch with reality and descend into collective delusions. And history provides us with terrifying examples of how this unfolds. Consider the witch hunts that swept through Europe and America in the 16th and 17th centuries. During this period, thousands of individuals, mostly women, were tortured and killed not for any crimes they actually committed, but because they became scapegoats in societies gripped by collective madness. Frances Hill, in her book, A Delusion of Satan, writes, "In some Swiss villages, there were scarcely any women left alive after the frenzy had finally burned itself out." Or consider the rise of totalitarianism in the 20th century. Millions of educated people in Germany, Russia, China, and Cambodia embraced ideologies that led to the systematic murder of their own neighbors, colleagues, and family members. The process of mass formation follows a predictable pattern. First, there's what researchers call the phase of panic. Widespread anxiety, confusion, and fear sweep through the population. People become frightened and disoriented, unable to explain the strange occurrences they're experiencing. Second, there's the phase of psychotic insight. Someone offers a simple explanation for the chaos and confusion. This explanation is usually false, often wildly so, but it provides psychological relief by making sense of senseless events. The explanation doesn't have to be true. It just has to reduce anxiety. As psychologist Silvano Arietti observed, this psychotic insight allows people to put things together by creating a pathological way of seeing reality. Third, the masses embrace this delusional explanation because it offers relief from the unbearable uncertainty and fear. They don't adopt these beliefs despite their irrationality. They adopt them because of their psychological utility. This is where the methods of what Just Mirlu called menticide, literally killing of the mind, become crucial. Mirlu described it as an organized system of psychological intervention, through which a ruling class can imprint their own opportunistic thoughts upon the minds of those they plan to use and destroy. The process begins with the deliberate creation of fear and confusion. Populations are subjected to what Mirlu called waves of terror, periods of intense fear-mongering followed by periods of calm, then even more intense fear, and so on. Each wave creates greater psychological damage than the last, because people are already destabilized by previous trauma. Simultaneously, propaganda spreads misinformation and contradictory reports. Government officials and media figures use nonsensical information, contradictory claims, and outright lies. The goal isn't to convince people of any particular falsehood. It's to destroy their capacity for rational evaluation altogether. As Mirlu explains, logic can be met with logic, while illogic cannot. It confuses those who think straight. The big lie and monotonously repeated nonsense have more emotional appeal than logic and reason. While the people are still searching for a reasonable counter-argument to the first lie, the totalitarians can assault them with another. Modern technology has made this process devastatingly effective. Smartphones, social media, television, and the internet, combined with algorithms and bots, allow those in power to assault minds with unprecedented precision and intensity. Mirlu observed this trend even in the early days of mass media. Modern technology teaches man to take for granted the world he is looking at. He takes no time to retreat and reflect. Technology lures him on, dropping him into its wheels and movements. No rest, no meditation, no reflection, no conversation. The senses are continually overloaded with stimuli. Man doesn't learn to question his world anymore. The screen offers him answers, ready-made. The final component is isolation, disrupting normal social interactions and separating people from corrective influences. When individuals are cut off from family, friends, and colleagues who might challenge delusional thinking, they become far more susceptible to manipulation. Isolation serves multiple purposes. It eliminates positive examples of people who resist the mass formation. It makes behavioral conditioning more effective. As Pavlov discovered, isolation accelerates the development of conditioned responses. And it increases psychological dependence on approved information sources. Once a population has been destabilized by fear, confused by contradictory information, and isolated from normal social supports, they become desperate for relief. This is when would-be totalitarians offer their solution. Surrender your freedom. Stop thinking for yourself. And trust us to make everything better. The masses, exhausted by uncertainty and terror, embrace this offer. They don't see it as surrendering their humanity. They see it as returning to order and safety. But the order offered by totalitarian systems is pathological order. It eliminates the spontaneity that produces joy, the creativity that drives progress, and the individual responsibility that makes civilization possible. As Jung observed about people caught in mass psychosis, they become morally and spiritually inferior. They sink unconsciously to an inferior intellectual level, becoming more unreasonable, irresponsible, emotional, erratic, and unreliable. Most terrifyingly, Jung noted, Crimes the individual alone could never stand are freely committed by the group. This explains how the Holocaust happened, how the Rwandan genocide unfolded, how the Cambodian killing fields filled with bodies, how the Ukrainian Holodomor starved millions, how China's Cultural Revolution turned children against parents and students against teachers. In each case, ordinary people, teachers, doctors, neighbors, colleagues, participated in atrocities they never could have committed as individuals. Mass formation psychosis made the impossible inevitable. Level 6 represents the culmination of collective stupidity, the point where entire societies lose their capacity for rational thought and moral judgment. Individual susceptibility, social conformity, authority worship, intellectual rationalization, and institutional capture combine to create populations capable of believing anything and doing anything. But there's still one more level, the most dangerous of all. The seventh and final level is the most terrifying because it represents the point where advanced civilizations use their collective intelligence not to solve problems or pursue truth, but to rationalize their own destruction. This is the ultimate paradox of human intelligence. The most dangerous societies aren't the ignorant ones. They're the intelligent ones that have turned their intellectual power against themselves. Think of it like the ant death spiral that occurs when army ants accidentally follow each other's pheromone trails in a circle. They march in formation until they die of exhaustion, following their own chemical signals to destruction. But ants don't have PhD programs to make their death spirals sound scientific. Level 7 is the human equivalent. When highly educated, technologically advanced civilizations create elaborate intellectual justifications for obviously self-destructive behaviors. The mechanism works through what researcher Rob Henderson calls luxury beliefs, ideas that confer status on educated elites while imposing costs on everyone else. The more counterintuitive, harmful, or detached from reality these beliefs are, the more intellectual capital one gains for defending them. This creates a perverse selection pressure where truth-seeking becomes a liability and sophisticated rationalization becomes an asset. In academic, media, and political circles, success goes not to those who understand reality, but to those who can craft the most elegant justifications for fashionable delusions. Consider some beliefs that have gained currency among highly educated people. That biological sex is a social construct, despite obvious biological reality, and the fact that every other species manages to reproduce without graduate seminars on gender theory. That objective truth is a form of oppression, despite the fact that objective truth is what allows us to build bridges that don't collapse, develop medicines that work, and create technologies that function. That merit-based evaluation is discriminatory, despite the fact that meritocracy, however imperfect, has lifted more people out of poverty than any other system in human history. That free speech is dangerous, despite the fact that the ability to challenge prevailing orthodoxies is what makes intellectual and moral progress possible. That censoring dissent protects democracy, despite the fact that democracy literally means rule by the people, which requires that people have access to information and the ability to debate it freely. These aren't fringe beliefs held by obvious cranks. They're mainstream positions in elite universities, major media organizations, and government institutions. They're defended by people with advanced degrees, prestigious positions, and powerful platforms. The sophistication of the defenders makes these beliefs more dangerous, not less. When obviously false ideas are promoted by obviously stupid people, they're easy to dismiss. But when they're promoted by Nobel Prize winners, Ivy League professors, and New York Times columnists, they gain credibility regardless of their merit. This is how civilizations commit suicide, not through external conquest or natural disaster, but through the gradual replacement of reality-based thinking with status-based thinking. Historical examples abound. The Roman Empire didn't fall primarily because of barbarian invasions. It fell because its elites became increasingly detached from the practical realities of governance, economics, and military affairs. They pursued status games and ideological purity while infrastructure crumbled and enemies gathered strength. The Mayan civilization collapsed not because of environmental catastrophe, but because its ruling class became obsessed with increasingly elaborate rituals and monuments, while basic agricultural and water management systems failed. The Soviet Union imploded not because of external pressure, but because its intellectual elite committed themselves to economic theories that were obviously false but ideologically fashionable. The smarter the defenders of central planning, the longer it took to admit that the system didn't work. Each collapsed civilization exhibited the same pattern. Elites who were too intelligent to acknowledge obvious realities because doing so would threaten their status within their intellectual community. And here's the terrifying possibility. We might be in level 7 right now. Consider the evidence. We live in the most educated era in human history, yet we're simultaneously experiencing declining trust in institutions that have repeatedly proven themselves incompetent or corrupt, yet continue to demand deference based on credentialed authority. Increasing political polarization that makes rational discourse nearly impossible, even as we have access to more information than ever before. Economic policies that create obvious problems, like inflation and asset bubbles, while experts insist these problems don't exist or are actually beneficial. Educational systems that produce graduates who know less about basic civics, history, science, and mathematics than previous generations, yet consider themselves more enlightened. Scientific institutions that increasingly prioritize ideological conformity over empirical accuracy while claiming to represent objective truth. Media organizations that abandon journalistic standards in favor of political advocacy while claiming to fight misinformation. Social media platforms that claim to combat hate speech by censoring factual information that contradicts preferred narratives. Legal systems that explicitly reject equal treatment under law in favor of equity while claiming to pursue justice. In each case, highly intelligent, well-credentialed people use sophisticated arguments to defend obviously counterproductive policies. The intellectual quality of the justifications makes the policies seem reasonable, even when their results are disastrous. This is level 7 in action. Civilizational suicide disguised as intellectual sophistication. The most chilling aspect is that civilizations experiencing level 7 stupidity can't recognize it while it's happening. By definition, a society that has turned its intelligence against itself will use that intelligence to rationalize its self-destruction. Every previous civilization thought it was too advanced, too sophisticated, too intelligent to collapse. The Romans couldn't imagine barbarians overrunning their empire. The Mayans couldn't conceive of their cities being swallowed by jungle. Soviet intellectuals couldn't believe their system would simply stop functioning. We suffer from the same delusion. We think our technology makes us invulnerable. Our education makes us wise. Our institutions make us stable. But technology amplifies human capabilities, including the capacity for self-deception. Education without wisdom creates sophisticated fools. Institutions without integrity become vehicles for organized stupidity. The question isn't whether civilizational collapse could happen to us. The question is whether it's already happening, and whether we're too intelligent to notice. The escape route. But this isn't a counsel of despair. Understanding the 7 levels of collective stupidity is the first step toward escaping them. Carl Jung, who studied mass psychosis extensively, offered this guidance. It is not for nothing that our age cries out for the Redeemer personality, for the one who can emancipate himself from the grip of the collective psychosis and save at least his own soul, who lights a beacon of hope for others, proclaiming that here is at least one man who has succeeded in extricating himself from the fatal identity with the group's psyche. The path to freedom requires both external and internal liberation. External liberation means breaking free from the systems that profit from your stupidity, the media that feeds you outrage, the institutions that demand conformity, the technologies that manipulate your attention, the social groups that punish independent thought. Internal liberation means taking personal responsibility for your own mind, questioning your strongest beliefs, seeking out disconfirming evidence, practicing intellectual humility, and developing the courage to think and speak truthfully even when it's socially costly.
Research by Dan Kahan and others has identified 2 qualities that consistently protect against motivated reasoning: curiosity and humility. Curiosity, the genuine desire to understand rather than to confirm existing beliefs, motivates us to seek out information that challenges our assumptions rather than information that validates them. Humility, the recognition that even intelligent people are deeply fallible, prevents us from overvaluing our own reasoning and makes us more willing to change our minds when evidence demands it. These qualities aren't developed through traditional education. They're matters of character more than cognition. As philosopher John Dewey noted,
We do not learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on experience. Similarly, we don't become rational by accumulating knowledge, but by developing the character traits that orient our intelligence toward truth rather than self-deception. Practically, this means question your own motivations for believing things. Ask yourself, do I believe this because it's true, or because believing it makes me feel good about myself? Actively seek out the strongest arguments against your positions. If you can't articulate why intelligent people disagree with you, you don't understand the issue well enough to have an informed opinion. Practice saying, "I don't know," and "I was wrong." These might be the most important phrases in the English language for maintaining mental health in an age of information overload. Build relationships with people who will challenge your thinking without attacking your character. Surround yourself with people who care more about your growth than your agreement. Read primary sources rather than interpretations. Don't let other people's mental models become your reality without examining the underlying evidence yourself. Develop practical skills that connect you to physical reality. Work with your hands. Build something. Grow something. Fix something. Abstract thinking without practical grounding leads to sophisticated delusions. Conclusion: the ultimate test. So here's the uncomfortable truth that I've been building toward throughout this entire analysis. If you watched this breakdown of collective stupidity and thought, "Those other people are so stupid," you've completely missed the point. The most dangerous person in any society isn't the obviously ignorant. It's the educated individual who can't conceive of their own stupidity. Throughout history, the most intelligent societies have repeatedly chosen their own destruction. The pattern is always the same. They become too smart to see their own stupidity. Rome fell not to barbarians, but to its own intellectual arrogance. The Soviet Union collapsed not from external pressure, but from internal delusion. Germany descended into genocide not through ignorance, but through sophisticated rationalization. Each civilization thought it was different. Each believed it was too advanced, too educated, too rational to make the obvious mistakes of the past. Each was wrong. The terrifying reality is that we might be making the same mistake right now. We might be living through level 7 collective stupidity, using our unprecedented intelligence to rationalize our own civilizational suicide, and we might be too intelligent to recognize it. I want to leave you with a final challenge that will test whether you've truly understood what I've been saying. Think of one belief you hold that makes you feel intellectually or morally superior to other people. Just one. Maybe it's a political position, a scientific theory, a social cause, or a philosophical perspective. Something that, when you encounter people who disagree with it, makes you think, how can they be so stupid? Now ask yourself these questions. What would I have to see to change my mind about this belief? If you can't answer that question, you're not holding a rational belief. You're holding a religious conviction. Am I more motivated to defend this belief or to understand the truth? If defending feels more important than understanding, you've moved from curiosity to advocacy. Do I understand why intelligent, well-meaning people disagree with me? If you can't articulate the strongest arguments against your position, you don't understand the issue well enough to have a strong opinion. Would I still hold this belief if it lowered my status instead of raising it? If the answer is no, you might be holding a luxury belief, something that makes you feel virtuous while potentially causing harm. These questions are designed to be uncomfortable. They should make you squirm a little. Because the moment you become too comfortable with your own beliefs, too confident in your own intelligence, too certain of your own moral superiority, you've taken the first step into collective stupidity. Remember Bonhoeffer's warning. Stupidity is not a lack of intelligence. It's a moral defect. It's the choice to abandon critical thinking in favor of social comfort. Remember the Asch experiments. Most people will abandon their own perception of reality rather than stand alone against group pressure. Remember Milgram's research. Ordinary people will commit extraordinary evil when directed by authority figures they trust. Remember Kahan's findings. Intelligence doesn't protect against bias, it amplifies it. Remember Jung's insight. Psychic epidemics are more dangerous than any natural disaster because there's no protection against them except individual resistance. The question isn't whether you're susceptible to collective stupidity. You are. We all are. The question is what you're going to do about it. Are you going to use your intelligence to pursue truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it threatens your status, even when it isolates you from your tribe? Or are you going to use your intelligence to rationalize what you already believe, to defend what makes you feel good, to maintain your position within your social group? The choice is yours. But remember, civilizations rise and fall based on how their most intelligent members answer this question. History is watching. Your descendants are counting on you. The future of human civilization may depend on whether enough people choose curiosity over comfort, humility over hubris, truth over tribal belonging. Don't let intelligence become your weakness. Don't let education become your prizo. Don't let sophistication become your blindness. The 7 levels of collective stupidity are not inevitable. They're choices, individual choices that compound into social realities. You have the power to break the cycle. You have the ability to think for yourself. You have the responsibility to resist the comfortable delusions that destroy civilizations. The question is, will you use it? If this video challenged your thinking, share it with someone who will hate it. If everyone you know would agree with everything I've said, you're already trapped in an echo chamber. Break out. Seek disagreement. Question everything, especially your own beliefs. And remember, the moment you think you're immune to stupidity is the moment you've succumbed to it. The choice is yours. Choose wisely. The future depends on it.